My son, a gifted surgeon, whose hands once trembled when I taught him to tie his very first shoelace, now sits across from me. Beside him is his wife, a successful attorney whose entire education I financed. On the table between us lies a folder. Inside are not ordinary papers, but a sentence written for me. Either I sign over the house worth $3,800,000, the home my wife Margaret and I spent our lives building, or they will take me to court, declare me legally incompetent, and turn me into a useless old man who must be managed. In their eyes, I have become nothing but a burden, an obstacle to be removed. What they don't know is this: I am not just an old man. I am an auditor. And today, I am about to conduct the final review of my life. An audit not of numbers, but of betrayal. Before I tell you what I placed inside the folder to answer them, tell me, where are you listening to this story from? Leave a comment below. And if you believe true power lies not in the loudest shout but in the ability to plan patiently and precisely, hit like and subscribe to join me on this journey. Late Saturday afternoon in Newport, the last sunlight draped across my back like a fading shawl. It was no longer the gentle warmth of October, but a fragile aftertaste announcing that summer had passed. I was kneeling by the deep red roses Margaret Hale had cherished most. Today that red was not just beauty. It looked like dried blood, reminding me of sacrifices and memories etched deep. The scent was so thick it became stifling, filling the entire garden. I clenched a handful of cool, damp soil, trying to hold on to one last thread of clarity in a world growing unfamiliar. Then it came, a discordant sound ripping through the quiet, the tires of a luxury car grinding into gravel like claws raking the earth. I didn't need to look to know whose car it was. The silver German sedan, gleaming and defiant, came up the drive as if it already owned the place. The door opened. Christopher Hale stepped out, polo shirt crisp, tailored slacks as though he'd just left a private club. Victoria Hale followed, a dark gray fitted suit hugging her frame, her heels staking into the grass like boundary posts. She carried a leather case, her eyes bypassing me entirely to lock onto the house, a block of assets. Not a home. Dad. Christopher's voice wasn't a greeting. It was a diagnosis. No warmth, only assessment. You shouldn't be doing this. You could fall. I've been tending this garden for 40 years, Christopher, I said calmly. I think I know how to stand up. Victoria moved forward, her heels sinking slightly into the soft earth. Her voice came out measured and elongated, like a judge reading a sentence. Edward Hale, we need to discuss some organizational changes. A property of this size for one person, it's financially irresponsible. The words were cold, sharp as blades. Financially irresponsible. The refuge Margaret and I had built over 3 decades reduced to a number in a spreadsheet. I turned toward the stone porch without inviting them in. Christopher followed closely, his hand landing on my shoulder. It wasn't a comforting touch. It was cold, heavy, pressing down like a mark of possession. Dad, this isn't just about money. We're worried. We've noticed some slowing in your thinking lately. This is about risk management. At your age, living alone. He stopped. But the unspoken words, senile, helpless, useless, hung in the air like invisible poison. She used the law to speak of property. He used medicine to speak of decline. Together, they declared me obsolete. I looked at my son. For a fleeting moment I saw the boy who used to help me garden, his hands dirty, laughing as he caught a worm. But the memory dissolved like mist. Before me stood a stranger in expensive clothes, hiding behind a facade of concern. You know, Christopher continued, pointing to the roses, Mother would want you cared for. She wouldn't want you clinging to the past. It's not good for your health. She'd want you to be practical. A blade twisted straight into an unhealed wound. My heartbeat stuttered. A chill ran down my spine. My hand clenched the soil so tightly my nails dug in. They were exploiting the memory of Margaret, my late wife, to coerce me. 5 years since she died, I had overlooked the missed calls, the brief visits, the polished condescension. I thought it was busyness, ambition. I was wrong. I lifted my head, stared directly at them. What do you want? Victoria's professional smile didn't touch her eyes. Christopher drew a breath, preparing to read the verdict. "Tomorrow we're moving in, Dad. The master bedroom upstairs will be ours. You can have the guest room next to the library. Victoria will manage the finances, and I'll handle your health care. It's the best thing, for everyone." The world fell into absolute silence. The hum of bees, the distant mower, all gone. Only that sentence echoed in my ears. Tomorrow we're moving in. Not a proposal, not a discussion. A gavel striking down in an invisible courtroom. A death sentence for the last scrap of my freedom. I let the silence stretch, looking at them. In my eyes, they were no longer family. They were two strangers wearing the mask of kin, holding keys not just to my house, but to lock away the rest of my life. They had prepared for every contingency, except one thing. They had forgotten who I am. My voice, when I spoke, was calm to the point of danger. "No one," I enunciated each word, "is allowed to move into this house." The air changed at once. The wind stopped. The birds fell silent. In an instant, the garden became an invisible courtroom where every glance and every breath was stretched, taut, and suffocating. The mask of concern on Christopher Hale's face trembled, revealing a raw flicker of irritation. Victoria Hale was colder than ever. Her smile vanished, replaced by a blade-sharp look. She seemed to peel off the family mask and reveal the true face of a merciless prosecutor. Calmly, Victoria set her leather briefcase on the glass table on the porch. The clasp snapped shut with a sound as crisp as a gavel. She opened the case and drew out a sleek leather folder. As she slid it toward me, the folder scraped across the glass with a metallic hiss. Her voice dropped, cold enough to be cruel. "I had hoped we could resolve this amicably, Edward, but we are prepared for this outcome." Her finger tapped the folder a steady beat, like a judgment being struck. "Perhaps you are not familiar with Rhode Island's guardianship statutes. When an elderly individual is deemed incapable of managing substantial assets, especially showing signs of diminished capacity, the family has a duty to petition the court. You may think yourself lucid, but the court might not. A few medical reports, a few signatures from Christopher's colleagues, that may be enough to turn you into a line item in a legal file." She leaned forward, her tone hissing a little. "And then every bank statement, every prescription, even the unpaid electric bills you've let slide, all of it will be read aloud in court." Each word landed like a stone thrown at a face. Christopher cut in, sharp and clinical, like a doctor delivering a death sentence. "I've seen the signs, Dad. The slowing down, the confusion. The court will believe me, not you." He folded his arms, a gesture no longer of a son, but of someone pronouncing the final diagnosis. Victoria opened the folder. Inside were two documents placed side by side. "This," her finger tapped the first page, "is a deed of transfer. Just your signature, and this house will be safe and neatly in family hands." Her finger moved to the document beside it. "And this is how you prevent us from filing a guardianship petition on Monday morning. The choice is yours, voluntary cooperation or legal intervention. The outcome is the same either way. We will control everything." In their eyes, I was no longer a father. I was a patient with dementia, a legal liability to be liquidated. I let the silence lengthen. My gaze rested on Christopher's strained face, sweat beating at his temple, then on Victoria's predatory look, where a flash of anxiety flickered despite her efforts to conceal it. I looked at the stack of papers before me, the thing they had designed to be the full stop at the end of my life. Then I did something they did not expect. I smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the quiet, knife-edged smile of an auditor who had spent 50 years exposing hidden weaknesses in systems that seemed airtight. That smile fractured the air, as if the balance of power had suddenly tipped. The confidence on their faces wavered. That reaction was not in their script. "All right," I said, my voice even and steady, each word landing on the table. "If you want to fight by law, we will fight where the law belongs. Thursday, 9 a.m., Richard Coleman's office. We'll go through the details then. Prepare for a real audit." I stood on the porch for a long time after the silver sedan had disappeared down the drive. The silence it left behind was heavier than the engine's roar. The wind died, the scent of roses and damp earth faded, replaced by the sterile chill of a house that had been violated. On the glass table where Victoria had placed the folder, the shadow of a threat still seemed impressed. They had walked into the home Margaret and I built, trying to turn it into a cage. They used my love as a weakness and my age as a weapon. I went inside. The familiar room suddenly felt too large, terrifyingly empty. The objects in the house watched me quietly. The grandfather clock in the hall, Margaret's parents' wedding gift, ticked like a hammer. The floorboards creaked like the footsteps of ghosts. On the mantel was the photograph from the day we finished the porch floor. Margaret and I radiant in the sun, with Christopher about 10 years old behind us, a smear of dirt on his cheek. A pure, sharp pain hit me. My heart clenched, my vision blurred for a moment, then froze. Cold, hard, and crystalline, like an iceberg large enough to sink their arrogant ship. I went to my study, my bunker. Dark cherry paneling, bookshelves filled with history and finance. The place where I had managed the family's money for half a century, turning modest wages into savings through discipline and patience. The place where I taught Christopher taxes and bookkeeping lessons he chose to forget. I sat in the worn leather chair. The throw still carried a faint trace of Margaret's perfume. No hesitation, no fidgeting. I picked up the phone and dialed the number I knew by heart. It rang twice. Richard Coleman. His voice was low and steady, the friend and lawyer who had stood by me for 40 years. "Richard, it's Edward. Good to hear from you. How are the roses these days?" "Margaret planted them years ago. They're still healthy," I replied, my voice dipping and then hardening. "But the child is not." The warmth vanished on the other end. Richard's voice sharpened like a blade. "What happened?" I reported it like reading an audit memo. The unannounced visit, Victoria's talk of asset optimization, Christopher's labeling of me as slowing mentally, the ultimatum: either sign the deed or be subjected to guardianship. When I finished, silence compressed the line, then exploded. "The ungrateful bastard, how dare he? After everything you've done for him. Guardianship. I'll tear that woman's argument apart in court. We'll bring in our doctors, character witnesses. This is an outrageous insult." "Richard," I cut him off, in the tone of a general quelling an outburst. "Stop. Rage is not the weapon I need. I need evidence. Numbers. Things that can't be disputed." He fell silent. Then his lawyer's voice returned, low and precise. "What do you need?" "Start with his education records, everything. Tuition at Phillips Exeter Academy. Then 4 years at Yale. I want a figure." "I remember," Richard said softly. Margaret was so proud. "Good. Next, the down payment on his first apartment on the Upper East Side, 20% that I gave him as a gift after graduation. He sold that apartment for double 2 years later, right before he met Victoria. I have the file. That was a large gift. And one special file, fall 2007, labeled CH Educational Loan." I heard Richard hesitate. "Medical school tuition? I thought you gave it to give him a clean start." "I let Christopher believe that." I leaned back, staring at the ceiling. "But you and I know. We drafted an internal family loan agreement, $420,000, 5% compounded annually. You notarized it yourself. The paperwork is ironclad." Silence on the line, then an incredulous breath. "My God, Edward. I forgot because you never brought it up. You just let it slide." "I let him forget," I said slowly. "I told him to begin repaying once he was established in surgery. He began earning $500,000, then $650,000 a year. But not a single dollar came back. I assumed his success would be the repayment. I thought my son's happiness was my return on investment." I let out a dry laugh. "Seems I miscalculated what happiness looks like. What do you want me to do?" "Run the numbers." I lowered my voice, sharp as a command. "Principal plus interest over 30 years, precise, legally defensible, down to the last cent. Then assemble a full financial timeline of every significant transfer I ever made, From the first car to the so-called capital for his first practice items, he's conveniently forgotten. Done. Anything else? Find me the most discreet private investigator you know, professional, invisible. I suspect Christopher and Victoria will be celebrating tonight at some expensive restaurant. They think they've won. I want to know what they're toasting. Richard's voice dropped to a grave tone. I know the right man. Michael Turner. Edward, be careful. From now on, it's not me who needs to be careful, I said, looking out the window. Darkness was swallowing the lawn, the line between light and shadow like a declaration of war. I have audited massive corporations, but this is the most important audit of my life. I stood and latched the window, and it starts right now. After I hung up with Richard Coleman, I sat for a long time in the darkness of my study. Moonlight sliced a silver blade across the wooden floor through the window. The house was silent, but my mind was not. It hummed and rattled like a machine being restarted after years of neglect. The smoldering anger had hardened into a cold purpose. Grief had been filed away. The auditor had returned to his desk. I stood up. I did not go to bed. I went to the wooden door that led down to the basement. The hinge complained with a high, long squeal. The creak echoed down the hall like the moan of a house dreaming a nightmare. I flipped the switch. Click. A bare ceiling lamp threw a cold yellow light that cut away the remaining silver of the moon. The steep wooden stairs opened before me, leading down into the earth, down to my command center. A dry, sharp air rose up, heavy with the smell of old paper, cedar, and time. Not a family basement full of forgotten Christmas boxes and rusting tools. This was my war room. After I retired, I moved all the professional work down here. I would not relinquish order. I would not relinquish logic. This was the refuge of numbers, where everything had columns, ledgers, and reasons. And in the center, towering like an iron pillar, stood a bank of four-drawer file cabinets, fireproof, heavily locked. I pulled a small key I kept in an old desk drawer, stepped to the first cabinet, and paused. Silence. Then the key turned. Click. The sound satisfied me, like a judgment sealed. The drawer slid out. Files brushed by in a susurrus, like ghostly letters. Tabs, perfectly typed, stood in neat rows. I was no longer a father rummaging through memories. I was an investigator opening a cold case file. The case, my son. My fingers skimmed the tabs. First bicycle 1985, summer camp 1992. Then they stopped at a thick folder, Christopher Hale, higher education. I pulled it out and set it on the work table. Under the harsh lamp I opened the file. What lay there was not recollection but evidence. Columbia University tuition bills that made my hand tremble when I had signed them. Bank statements showing large withdrawals from our retirement fund. All sacrifices logged in ink and figures. But I continued searching. I was looking for a single envelope. Tucked deep in the back, sealed inside a manila wrapper, it had lain quiet for 2 decades. I rested my fingertip on the dried glue, then slowly tore it open. The rip sounded like a lock snapping. I drew out the paper. Family Educational Loan Agreement, $420,000. 3 signatures stood clear at the bottom. Mine. Firm, steady. Richard Coleman's, lawyerly, sharp, authoritative. And Christopher Hale's, hurried, almost careless, the handwriting of a young man racing toward a bright future, signing a paper his father had told him was merely a formality. I dragged my thumb across his name. A formality. I had let him believe that. I had let him treat $420,000 as a gift, a mistake. But now that mistake had become a perfect legal weapon. A signature thought meaningless had become a binding obligation, compounded with interest over 30 years. I sank back into the chair, my eyes fixed on the bold number on the page. "All right," I murmured. I let him believe it was a formality. Now I will use that very formality to bring him down. The mistake would be corrected. The audit had officially begun. But that was only the beginning. That $420,000 loan was merely the cornerstone. Now I had to build the whole structure around it. For the next several hours I worked without stopping. I did not feel tired. I did not feel old. I felt absolute clarity, like a jolt of adrenaline running straight through my veins. I turned on the old desktop computer, the bulky monitor humming its familiar hiss. The machine became a steady metronome, the heartbeat of the audit. The basement's smell of old paper and cedar wood mingled, thick and cloying like buried guilt. I still maintained premium access to the major financial and credit databases, a subscription fee I had never canceled. Tonight it paid off more than ever. I typed in the names, Christopher Hale, Victoria Hale. The data came back, line by line, slashing at the false portrait they'd presented to the world. There it was, a massive mortgage on the penthouse in Seaport, Newport, a figure that made my eyes stop. I saw the loan for Christopher's Porsche Panamera and Victoria's Range Rover autobiography. I saw at least half a dozen high-limit credit cards, each maxed out. This was not a picture of success. This was a portrait of people living on the razor edge of debt. I cross-checked the address with public property records. Then the biggest crack appeared, a second mortgage. 6 months ago they had drawn the home equity line of credit down to the limit. It was the classic move of the financially desperate borrowing against what should be security to pay for a lifestyle. I remembered Victoria boasting about an investment in a tech startup. I searched business news archives. It took less than 30 minutes. The company had gone bankrupt within 18 months, wiping out investors. Her name was on the investor list. The loss was substantial, 6 figures. Then I turned to Christopher. His profile did not list him as a partner at Mount Sinai Hospital as I had assumed. He was listed as a consulting surgeon, less secure, no hospital pension, and, crucially, responsible for his own malpractice insurance. I ran a search on legal databases. I typed his name, and there it was, a malpractice lawsuit filed 2 years ago, quietly settled out of court. But settlements are never cheap, and premiums spike afterward. I leaned back. The pieces assembled into a picture: expensive penthouse, luxury cars, maxed credit cards, failed investment, malpractice settlement. This was not the portrait of wealth. This was an indictment of desperation. They had built themselves a gilded cage, and now the walls were collapsing. Christopher's income was high, but it could not stop the monthly hemorrhage. Then it hit me. The visit that afternoon, the ultimatum, the talk about my supposed lapses in cognition. It was not simply greed, it was panic. They were not trying to get richer. They were trying to stay afloat. My house, a $4,500,000 home, paid off and free of mortgage, was not a bonus they deserved. It was their lifeline, and to seize it, they were willing to drown me. I printed everything: credit reports, mortgage records, articles about the startup, the malpractice filings. The hot ink stacks felt heavy in my hands, heavy with the weight of 20 years of deceit. On the desk they ceased to be papers. They became weapons. I was no longer the betrayed father. I was an auditor who had just uncovered a large-scale fraud, and the culprits were Christopher and Victoria Hale. I stood up, gathered the pile of documents. The basement light still glowed behind me. I no longer needed the dark. The storm was no longer gathering. It had arrived, and I was the calm, cold, calculating eye of it. 6 days. Each night was a tolling bell of judgment. Each morning, the ticking of the grandfather clock ratcheted one notch closer to a trial yet to be called. Saturday morning came, cold and laced with mist, as though the air itself had been sterilized of feeling. I chose soft trousers and a faded cashmere sweater, Margaret's favorite. I needed to look weary, resigned. Richard Coleman picked me up. We drove in silence. Inside the old brick building, the wooden floors creaked like a judge's gavel. The smell of aged leather, ancient books, and coffee was more than warmth. It was the scent of law, history, and rulings past. Cross-cut sunlight spilled from tall windows across the mahogany table, dividing the battlefield in two. We sat down. The files before us were deliberately scattered, meant to look like the desperate defense of a man cornered, not the sharpened spear of an attack. They arrived 5 minutes early. Victoria in a gray suit, hair bound tight. Christopher in a dark tailored suit. They didn't enter as family. They entered like a hostile takeover team. Victoria set her leather briefcase on the table. The edge scraped across the wood with a sound like a blade. She gave a thin smile, her voice the cadence of a verdict. "Thank you for meeting us, Richard, Edward. We appreciate your timely cooperation. Our goal is a clean ending, less pain for everyone." She slid a thick folder across the glass. "Here is the deed transfer and full financial power of attorney. Just a formality, legitimizing the supportive structure Christopher and I will manage for Edward from now on. Sometimes kindness requires governance, you know." Christopher layered his legal strike with a veneer of concern, but his surgeon's voice was still clinical and cold. "I've noted certain signs of decline. If the court inquires, the medical records will speak for themselves. What we're doing, it's for your safety, Dad, and for the legal stability of the estate." Richard adjusted his glasses, reading as though weak yet planting barbs. "My client is fully capable of managing his affairs. This is his primary residence of over 40 years. You're asking him to sign away his autonomy, what the court still calls dignity." Victoria did not blink. "Then preserve the legacy by signing now. Otherwise, guardianship will be filed Monday morning. At that point, every bank statement, every prescription, even unpaid utility bills will be public record." I hunched slightly, one hand trembling on the edge of the table, then stilled. I gazed out the window, avoiding their eyes, letting silence swell. They began to speak of redecorating the upstairs, replacing the security system as if I were already gone. Richard turned, feigning fatigue. "Edward, what do you think?" I inhaled deeply. My hands clenched. Then I raised my head, eyes locking on Christopher. "I remember the day you came home from the hospital. Your mother, she painted your nursery sky blue herself, drew clouds on the ceiling. She said she wanted your very first dream to be of the sky." A flicker of impatience flashed in Christopher's eyes. He didn't want memories. He wanted a signature. My voice caught. "She loved this house. Every rose bush, every floorboard. She wanted you happy, safe." I looked down at the documents, black ink words poised to erase everything we had built. I sighed, shoulders sagging. "You're right. I'm tired. The house, it's too much for one man. Too many memories." I lifted my gaze, eyes glistening. "I'll sign." The room's electricity shifted. Christopher's shoulders loosened. Victoria's lips twitched with a fleeting smile of triumph. She slid a gold fountain pen across the table. The metal caught the light, gleaming like bait beneath the water. "Edward, you'll see this is for the best." I reached out, touched the pen, paused, raised my eyes. "But not today." Victoria's smile froze. "What do you mean, not today?" My voice softened, human. "This is a big step. The house still holds keepsakes, Margaret's letters, her paintings. I need a few days to sort things, to say goodbye. And I must review the house papers properly before handing them over. I can't sign everything away in a single moment." Richard seized the pause, his tone measured, pleading, entirely reasonable, entirely humane. 1 week for emotional and practical preparation. The documents next week will remain identical. Victoria's eyes hardened to ice, her instincts screaming delay was dangerous. But Christopher, drunk on victory, rushed to appear magnanimous. "Of course, Dad. 1 week. We're not monsters. Next Saturday, we'll come to the house and finalize everything. In the meantime, we'll get contractor quotes for the upstairs." Victoria's jaw tightened, then she swallowed. "Very well. Next Saturday." They rose, steps confident, conquerors departing. The oak door slammed shut. Dust motes swirled alone in the slanted light. A minute of silence. I straightened. The hunched shoulders were gone. The mask of weariness slipped away, leaving a gleam sharp as cut glass. Richard gathered the papers smoothly. He looked at me, a slow smile breaking. "Did they bite?" I lifted the gold pen they had left behind, feeling its weight beautiful, cold, like a baited hook. "Completely," I said. "Hook, line, and sinker." Boston that night did not glitter. It was sharp, cold. Skyscraper lights cut across the glass like surgical blades, reflecting the mist rising from the Charles River in a sickly sodium glow. The city lay open, chest cracked, exposing ambitions murmuring in the dark. While I sat in my basement, excavating evidence, Christopher Hale and Victoria Hale were downtown, celebrating the future they thought was theirs. They believed they were invisible. They didn't know they were being watched, didn't know that every word, every triumphant laugh, was turning into evidence. Richard Coleman wasted no time. He hired Michael Turner, a former homicide cop turned private investigator, a master at blending into the background. Turner sat at the bar of a ludicrously expensive steakhouse. Dark wood, dim light, the smell of seared butter and charred meat heavy in the air, cutlery clinking like punctuation marks in a deposition. He sipped soda, turning his glass 30 degrees at a time. His phone rested on the counter, microphone angled perfectly toward a mirrored alcove 2 tables away. The ideal position. They thought themselves concealed, yet their voices fell straight into the trap. The first sound on the recording was crystal glasses colliding with a dry crack, like a gavel striking open court. Then Victoria's voice, clear, precise. "To a clean ending," Christopher replied, smugness dripping. "To finally getting what we deserve." Their drinking echoed. Turner noted, "Expensive champagne, the kind remembered only for the line item on a bill." Christopher chuckled. "The old man nearly got to me today. All that nonsense about Mom and the nursery painted sky blue. For a moment I thought he'd cry. Pathetic. Victoria snorted, cold. "His emotions are predictable variables. Easy to exploit. I told you, frame it as safety. Strike the sentimental chord, and he folds. That generation thinks concession is a virtue." Christopher sneered. "He conceded today, didn't he? A whole week just to say goodbye to a few old letters." Victoria's tone shifted to administrative chill. "Nothing changes. The second his signature hits paper, I'll overnight the documents to the registry and file electronically. By Tuesday afternoon, we're legal co-owners. The assets secured." Christopher leaned in, whispering, "And the bank?" Victoria sipped her wine, her words like minutes read into record. "I had lunch with Mark from the private bank yesterday. I told him we were consolidating family property. With a $3.8 million house, mortgage-free, they opened a credit line immediately. Credit cards, penthouse mortgage, your malpractice premiums. All of it cleared. Credit score jumps." Christopher's shoulders dropped, eyes lighting like a surgeon finding oxygen in an OR. "And then? Then we play the dutiful children for a year, 18 months if necessary. Make a few token renovations to legitimize it. Then we sell." Christopher frowned. "Sell the house?" "Of course. Don't be sentimental. It's a tool, not a shrine. Liquidity is the real value. After taxes, we'll have startup capital. A private clinic with your name on it. No hospital board, no bureaucracy. Your name on the building." Christopher nodded, eyes flashing. "But Victoria wasn't finished. And my campaign, a Senate exploratory committee needs funding. Victoria Hale for Senate. Has the right ring, doesn't it?" They fell silent, picturing a future built on the rubble of my life. Then Christopher asked, voice lower, "And Dad? When the house is sold, what do we do with him?" Victoria's reply was surgical, cold, without pity. "I've researched. There are several high-end care facilities in Cape Cod, landscaped gardens, nurses on call 24/7. I've chosen Oceanside Heritage Residence. Excellent reviews." Christopher hesitated, conscience flickering dimly. "Is that really necessary?" Victoria snapped, her voice ablade. "Be realistic. We can't have him living with us. We can't leave him alone. He's a liability. This is the most humane option. Hot meals, nurses, and most importantly," she paused, lowered her voice. One word. Chilling. "Supervision. Not a father. A case. Not a man. A burden to be managed." The glasses clinked once more. "To the future," Christopher said. "To the future?" Victoria echoed. Michael Turner stopped the recording, paid for his soda in cash, and stepped into the cold Boston night. Inside, they still drank, still laughed, believing themselves untouchable. But they had handed me everything. In their moment of triumph, they confessed it all. And my audit patient, cold, relentless, was now complete. July 1. Silence thin as paper. They left Richard Coleman's office with the smugness of victors. Christopher Hale and Victoria Hale sat before their computer screens, scrolling through Italian luxury furniture catalogs, debating countertop stone and wine cabinet styles. They believed the game was over. July 2. The silence thickened. I watered Margaret's roses in the morning Sunday. The grandfather clock ticked as though swallowing every second. In Michael Turner's later report, he noted, Christopher checked his voicemail only to hear the cold beep of emptiness. July 3. Silence clung to the walls. The phone rang, a voicemail from Christopher strained, half doctor, half son. Hi, Dad. Remember to use the handrail on the stairs. I'll come check your blood pressure this weekend. My inbox swallowed it whole. No reply. An hour later, Victoria called. Her voice formulaic, full lawyer mode. Edward, confirmation, Friday signing. If necessary, I'll arrange the packing crew. That too fell into silence. July 4. The city exploded with fireworks of independence, while inside my house, stillness congealed into dread. They began sending texts. Thursday, 10:10 p.m. Victoria, Edward, request response. Schedule finalized. Not a single word in return. July 5. Silence weighed like stone. Turner's notes described Christopher sitting in the dining room, opening his banking app 3 times in 10 minutes. Victoria repeatedly opened and shut her wedding ring box as though it were a click pen. They began to smell unease. But in Victoria's world, silence was never an emotion. It was a tactic. A full week of silence from an opponent she thought defeated? That was an alarm. July 6. I was not the loser slumped in lament. The house transformed into a hive, humming with order. I met Laura Mitchell, the discreet realtor who specialized in off-market transactions. I called the president of a national moving firm, coordinating logistics with military precision, containers, seals, route codes, and I sat once more in Richard's office, signing page after page. Each signature a rivet, each red seal drying as quickly as blood closing a wound. July 7. Morning. The house echoed with an emptiness like rooms about to change owners. I sat at my desk, a steaming mug of black coffee before me. Strong, slightly bitter the ritual before judgment. The clock ticked, each beat like a gavel strike in court. 10:20, not the appointed time, the activation time. My phone buzzed across polished wood. A message lit the screen, a beacon of their impatience and arrogance. We're on our way. The movers arrive at noon. I read it, paused, took another sip of coffee, then typed back, each word slow, deliberate, like fastening the final entry of an audit. Everything is ready for you, son. I've left an envelope on the mantel. Read it before moving anything. Send. Ting. A small, precise sound. Coffee steam curled upward. The clock kept swallowing seconds. The door was open. All that remained was to let them step through it themselves. The Newport sky was crystal clear after the last breath of ocean wind, sunlight scattered gently across the row of ancient maples. Inside the sedan, the air was thick. Christopher drummed the steering wheel like a war drum beating too early. Victoria clutched her phone, her voice sharp and clipped, confirming the mover's arrival. A week of waiting in their minds, the prize was already theirs. The car turned onto my street. They were still debating paint colors for the master bedroom when Christopher suddenly slammed the brakes. The car jolted to a halt. "What is it?" Victoria snapped, lifting her eyes from the screen. And then she saw it. In the middle of the meticulously trimmed lawn stood a dark wooden sign from a brokerage firm that handled only multi-million-dollar discrete transactions. Across it, a scarlet slash like a wound through their illusions. Sold. For a heartbeat, both froze. The word refused to match the reality they had built. Like a system error. "No, no, impossible," Christopher stammered, his whisper cracking into a cry. "Mistake." Victoria spat each word, lawyer sharp, or his final scare tactic. Inside, stick to the plan. They hurried along the stone path. The roses still bloomed, but the sign's shadow had darkened everything. Christopher fumbled with the keys. His hand trembled. The lock clicked. The oak door swung open. The first sound struck. Their footsteps echoed against marble floors, reverberating in the emptiness where thick Persian rugs had once swallowed all sound. They froze. The house was empty. Absolutely. The rugs were gone. The grandfather clock gone. Portraits, antique consoles, crystal chandeliers, all gutted. The scent of lemon-polished wood replaced by disinfectant and fresh paint, the smell of a property scrubbed clean, stripped of its life. They stepped into the living room. Sunlight poured through the tall windows, exposing nothing but an architectural shell. Scuff marks where the sofa once sat, a pale square where Margaret's favorite painting had hung like a crime scene after a theft. A life erased. And then they saw it. On the cold fireplace mantel, a single object, a thick, dark manila envelope. On it, in firm strokes of blue ink, Christopher and Victoria Hale. They approached as if nearing a bomb. Victoria lifted it heavier than a brick and tore it open. Christopher's eyes locked on it. The first document. Bold header, real estate purchase agreement, real estate purchase agreement, and real estate purchase agreement. Per channels sold as revel sols. Victoria's eyes scanned fast. The address. Purchase price. $4,500,000. Terms paid in full. No contingencies. Closing date yesterday. Buyer an anonymous trust. Her throat constricted. It's real. He sold it. Christopher snatched the papers, his face drained of color. At the bottom, a signature he knew too well, steady and unshaken Edward Hale. The house, the lifeline, the plan, the future had vanished. But the envelope was not empty. Beneath it, a document headed from the office of Richard Coleman. Christopher squinted, baffled. C.H. Educational loan. What is this? Victoria grabbed it. The opening lines: fall 2005. Principal, $350,000. Interest, 4% annually. Compounded over 20 years. Her finger slid down to the final figure, lips moving, stammering, then choking. Nearly 700,000. Her hands dropped. That was medical school tuition, not a gift, a loan. He's demanding principal and interest. Their foundation collapsed. Not only had they lost the $4.5 million estate, they now carried a new mortgage of debt. And still, it wasn't over. The next sheet wasn't legal jargon. It was a transcript, pristine white with cold black text. The first lines drained the blood from their faces. Christopher, the old man almost got to me. All that talk about mom and the nursery. Victoria, his emotions are a predictable variable, easy to exploit. Christopher forced a hollow laugh. No, someone misheard. No, Christopher, Victoria cut in, voice dry. That's us. The later sections spelled it out with brutal clarity. The credit line against the house, the co-ownership scheme, minor renovations, resale after 18 months, a medical practice bearing Christopher's name, Victoria Hale for Senate, and finally, the damning exchange. Christopher, and what about Dad? What do we do with him? Victoria, I've chosen Oceanside Heritage Residence in Cape Cod. He'll be supervised. Oh. The papers slipped from Victoria's hand, slicing the silence. Sunlight slanted through the windows, casting the documents like evidence under a courtroom spotlight. They stared at each other, no longer husband and wife, but accomplices exposed. Inside the envelope, one last page. A note, embossed with my initials, penned in steady blue ink. Christopher and Victoria, you wanted the house. I sold it. You wanted control of my estate. I secured it. This is not an act of anger. This is the final audit. Good luck with your debt. Edward. No lament, no accusation. Just a ledger closed, clean and cold. Victoria's hand, once steady enough to sign away corporations, now trembled uncontrollably. Contracts, debt claims, transcripts of their own betrayal spilled across the bare floor. Her perfect world shattered like glass. Christopher staggered back, his shoulders slamming against the wall where family portraits once hung, then slid down to the floor. In the cavernous emptiness, he was surrounded by the echo of his own greed. His eyes scanned the scattered papers. His wife, frozen. And at last, he understood. They hadn't fought a sentimental old man. They had walked straight into the arena of a master auditor who saw through deceit, assembled evidence, and executed judgment with precision, finality, and absolute authority. They had lost. Not just the house, not just the money, everything. The only sound left in that hollow mansion was Christopher Hale, a gifted heart surgeon collapsing into sobs, broken like a lost child. The air here is different, no longer heavy with the weight of past days, but warm, carrying the briny tang of the sea mixed with the breath of new winds. I sit on the balcony of a seaside apartment in South Carolina, not for its size, but for its view. Before me, the Atlantic stretches into infinity, the setting sun gilding the waves, the tide rolling steady as a heartbeat restored to rhythm. The distant cry of gulls echoes across the shore, the scent of salt carried in the evening breeze. This is not the remnant of a life, but the beginning of a new chapter. The ghosts of the old house no longer linger here. The silence here is not an absence. It is a presence. It is peace. On the small table before me, my laptop is open. On the screen appears the familiar face of Richard Coleman, his gentle smile framed by the old office, with its creaking wooden floors and the oak trees outside the window. Today's conversation is not about ultimatums or indictments. It is about the future. "Edward, you've just rewritten the future for hundreds of people," Richard said, his voice slow but weighted with meaning. He lifted a folder, eyes glinting with emotion. "The papers are ready. The Margaret Hale Scholarship Fund is officially established. $3 million. It is one of the largest personal endowments the university has ever received." I stared at the screen, silent for a moment, as though Margaret's face shimmered just behind him. "She would have loved this," I whispered, my eyes damp. She always believed education wasn't only a path to a job, but the shaping of a soul. Richard adjusted his glasses, clearing his throat to mask a flicker of emotion. "It will help countless medical and law students from difficult backgrounds, those who will serve the community with heart, not just skill." I nodded, my gaze drifting to the endless sea. Margaret, she would want the money to create doctors and lawyers with compassion, not just calculating minds. We ended the call. Richard bid me farewell with familiar warmth before disappearing from the screen. I closed the laptop. That clean, final click was like shutting the ledger of a life written in blood and tears. Now I sat alone but not lonely. The anger was gone. The thirst for victory had faded. What remained was calm, silence, and solidity. I did not need to destroy my son. Christopher had written his own indictment. I had only presented the evidence. The audit was complete. The books were balanced. On the table, beside the laptop, sat a small silver frame, tarnished but polished often. Inside was my favorite photo of Margaret, her head tilted back in laughter, the sunlight catching her hair like a halo. The picture was taken on this very coast, many years ago, during a holiday when we dreamed of retiring here one day. I lifted a cup of hot tea, its steam rising like the breath of a new life. I looked at her radiant smile, and for the first time in so very long, I smiled back. My reflection in the glass joined her image in the frame, a quiet reunion across time. Order had been restored. The true legacy had been preserved. The game of chess was finished. Yet the real victory was not in keeping wealth, but in keeping dignity, the one thing no one can ever steal. This story is a reminder that strength lies not in aggression, but in quiet wisdom and meticulous calculation. It warns us, when we dismiss those who came before us, treating them as relics instead of resources, we put ourselves at a disadvantage. Their memory, their lessons, are weapons more powerful than any wealth. My triumph was not born of rage, but of the calm precision of a lifetime spent auditing. And the greatest legacy I leave is not riches, but the dignity I defended and the goodness I pass on. If this story touched you, share it with those who know that sometimes The quietest people carry the most powerful lessons. And I want to hear from you. What is the greatest lesson you take from this journey? Leave a comment below or simply write, "Dignity is the true legacy," to show that you walked with me to the very end.